Hi Lou, how are you?
Hi, good. Thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. It's great to have the chance to have a conversation with you. We met as we were both doing a mentoring role, helping Sentient Media with their fellows group recently. So it's great to meet you through that conversation. And thank you for making the time to join Sentientist Conversations now.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor for me to talk to you about so many important topics.
I'm looking forward to it. And as this series of conversations are focused on two simple but very deep questions, what's real and what matters? And I clearly have a bias because I'm trying to frame and raise awareness of sentientism, which I describe as answering those questions by saying when it comes to choosing what to believe and what's real, we should use evidence and reason and take a naturalistic approach. And when it comes to what matters, the clue is in the name, we should have compassion for all sentient beings, any being that has the capacity to experience suffering, flourishing, or experience anything really. But I'm talking to people in these conversations who agree with that philosophy, disagree with it, not sure. It would be fascinating to hear your story. But before we get to those two questions, how would you best introduce yourself and your work?
I'm a lawyer from Kazakhstan and recently graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School, Animal Law Program, LLM.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And it was a very great experience for me. And actually, it opened my eyes to so many things I was ignorant about. And currently, I'm managing the Institute of Animal Law of Asia, also the co-founder of this organization. It's an educational research center that focuses on animal law issues in Asia and the world, and we are dedicated to providing news, research articles, and any educational information about animals in Asia.
That's great. Thank you. And we'll come back to that when we finish up and talk about how to make the world a better place because your institute is playing a role that fits into our agenda very neatly. So the first of the two questions I like to ask is, yeah, again, simple but deep. What's real? And for many of my guests, that's a story about whether they grew up in a naturalistic and atheistic sort of scientific family and social context or more spiritual or religious and supernatural and how their philosophy has shifted through their life on, I guess, that side of philosophy. So it'd be fascinating to know your personal story and you can wind the clock back as far as you like to your days in Kazakhstan or
Yeah, a lot of people think that Kazakhstan is a religious country. Actually, it's not, although I would say like the dominant religion are Islam and Christianity, but it's a secular country. And I used to be a religious, and actually, I was brought to religion by my mom when I was around 10 or 11 because I had to undergo back surgery. And I guess when some issues come up, parents become desperate and maybe they come up to religion and God to ask for help or something.
yeah.
So actually, I wasn't consciously brought to religion. I wouldn't say forced, but I was just brought to religion by my mom.
Yeah.
But
What religion did she pick? Was that Muslim?
Christianity.
Christianity. Okay, yeah.
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 Yeah. And I am not religious right now because I've realized I've learned about religion a little bit by myself, did some research and realized that it's not real. God is not real.
Yeah.
And I believe there is somebody above us, but it's not somebody like us. This person or whoever doesn't look like us. So it might be like anything. I believe in the universe and I believe in science, but I don't believe that there is like a person
Yeah.
who looks like us.
And did you believe when as you said, your mother brought you to Christianity, did you reluctantly believe at that point and then move away from it? Or were you always a little skeptical?
Yeah. So when I was brought to religion by my mom, I wasn't like going to church every Sunday or something like that. I wasn't praying, but I think I just believed in God, in the existence of God, and whoever it was or whatever this person looked like, I just believed that there's somebody.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like fanatically religious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, makes sense. And you say that, I guess even now you have this sense that there is something greater than us out there. Would you describe that as something that is naturalistic, that might be scientifically understood, that is just about the universe as a whole, the physical universe and how it's interconnected? Or do you have a sense that there maybe is something that's beyond physical reality and still, has some supernatural nature, even if it's not a personality or a consciousness? Is it possible to describe where you are on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing and challenging because I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, I mean, watching some documentaries and like reading about this reading about science and like supernatural experience of people. I personally haven't experienced supernatural stuff, but I've known people who did. And yeah, and I believe there's probably something beyond the personality. And yeah,
one thing that I think you and I can absolutely agree on is that it's important to be open-minded, right? And if we're ever 100% sure about something, then we stop looking for new ideas and new evidence. Yeah, for many people that journey never finishes, and arguably it shouldn't. So that's interesting. Thank you.
I used to believe in science because I used to believe in facts and reasoning. So it's proven, something is proven. But I also believe that there's something that cannot be explained.
Yeah.
So if God exists, it might be somebody, but not the human like us.
Yeah. And I think it's almost a dangerous thing to think of naturalism and science being able to prove things perfectly. I know that's often how it's presented, but I don't think that's the way it should work. I think it should always be open-minded, should have humility and have doubt at the heart of it, because science essentially stops if you're 100% sure. So in that context, I think it's deeply important to get very comfortable with not knowing things. And it's also important to recognize that there are some things we may never know, we may never be able to find out about. And at the same time, it's also important for me not to grant credence in things until there is evidence. So recognizing something might be possible is not the same as saying, I think it's likely. But as long as we hold back from that and we remain open-minded, I think that's an important way of developing an imperfect understanding of the world. And in a sense, we're just evolved apes. Sometimes we expect too much of our own ability to understand reality, and we need a bit of humility there as well. And the second question that I like to come on to is about what matters morally. And for some people who come from a religious worldview, they have a superstructure there already in a way. You do certain things because God tells you to do them, or because there's a list of rules or regulations. And it doesn't sound like a sort of, even the Christian worldview you had necessarily had too much influence on your ethics and your morals. But you can explain now, what are your thoughts about what matters morally, and what is the basis of morality for you? And again, how has that changed over your life?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I have a certain answer to that. Yeah, I totally agree with you that a lot of people base religion as their like starting point of the morality, but I wouldn't say I rely on religion to make some decisions and decide whether this action is moral or not. I honestly think that morality should come from heart. Before making some decisions, you need to just listen to yourself. Do you think it's right or wrong? Because there are so many situations in life where you can rely on your mind, but it might not be the right decision, although eventually it will lead you to the right path. But I think that what we need to do is to have some compassion before making any decision and to try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to analyze the situation. So I think that my basis of morality is probably personal experience and listening to myself.
Yeah, makes sense. So there's a strong theme of sort of intuition and your own sense of what's right and wrong. But as you said, this, a critical thing is to have that compassion and to recognize the perspective of others. And to my mind, in a naturalistic philosophy, naturalistic morality, that's almost the essence of any morality. Because if you're not being moral because you're following a list of rules or because you're being told what to do, morality almost seems to be by definition a concern for others. Trying to understand that perspective and caring about it almost is the core of morality. And it's interesting about the relationship with religion, because for some religious people, their morality really does come from the religious rules. That is almost the definition of what is morally correct to do, is compliance. But I think for most religious people, while the religion has an influence on their ethics, actually their ethic has much in common with yours and probably mine, which is it's more about compassion and understanding the experience of others and caring about others. And, it's a much more common sense type of morality too, that I think both you and I probably share. But one of the critical journeys that many of my guests go on, and it relates to your work and your studies too, is it's one thing to have compassion for others, but it's very important to work out who those others are that matter to you, because there are some people who discriminate in very unpleasant ways, even within the human species, but still have compassion for their in-group, even racists and homophobes and white supremacists love their mothers. So they still have compassion. The problem is it's limited. And for many people, they go through a journey of at least conceptually getting to the point of recognizing that all humans matter morally, at least conceptually, if not in practical terms. So it would be interesting to know your journey, both thinking about how broad your moral consideration is, and a critical point given the focus of sentientism is when people recognize that non-human animals, non-human sentience matter morally too. So that would be another interesting story. Again, you can wind the clock back as far as you like and then explain where your moral scope sits now and why.
Yeah, I don't know where to start with. Actually, let's see. Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that, yeah, I agree because I had some situations where there was a list of rules you should follow, and I followed those rules, and then it brought me to some uncomfortable situations. And I also agree that people are PCCs are too, like you mentioned, homophobes and white supremacists. So I remember that when I was a kid, I loved animals. Like I've always loved animals, and I've had dogs and cats, and like in my grandparents' house, I've always played with pets, and I always treated them like babies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was eating other animals, and I really didn't realize that it was wrong. It was morally wrong. Like, how can you love animals and eat other animals? It's basically giving a favor to one category of animals. But
yeah.
And then, like, when I first went to my law school in Kazakhstan, I met my professor who actually changed my mind in terms of she opened my perspective to animals, and that she actually discovered the animal law field in Kazakhstan. It's still very like new field in Kazakhstan right now, and people are not prepared for that yet. And I'm not even sure when they will be prepared for that, because the legal system doesn't work well in Kazakhstan, even for humans. Those typical crimes, they're like not fairly punished, like rape and homicide. So that's why I'm not sure that people are ready for the animal law field right now. And I was very fortunate when I met her, and actually I was taking her classes like of civil law and land law, family law, but she always made some examples involving animals. And then through her, I learned about the animal law program, and I was able to go and study this LLM. And before coming to the US, I was thinking that I would probably go vegetarian first or vegan someday in the future. At that time, I was just eating like poultry, but not red meat.
Yeah.
And now I understand it's so wrong. Like I didn't eat beef and pork, but I ate chicken, and I thought it's normal. But then like when I came to the United States and started studying animal law and started to learn a lot of things about animals and how they suffer, I realized how ignorant I was and didn't know about a lot of things that happen to animals. And I remember I was taking international animal law class by Dr. Raj Reddy. If you're watching this, thank you so much. Because actually this class, it like changed my world. I remember I was reading one case about stunning animals before slaughtering. And I remember that particular moment, I realized, okay, I don't want to eat meat anymore. And that was like 2019. And I became vegetarian in that year. And after that, so I was vegetarian, but then I took another class of crimes against animals, and we had a project in pairs. And my partner decided to choose the topic of the comparative analysis of male chicks in the United States and the European Union. And he shared some materials about what happens to male chicks in like agriculture industry, and that they're not really like useful, and they're just suffocated to death. And I was like, okay, I'm not eating eggs anymore. And that was like the moment of realization for me about eggs. And just recently, like at the beginning of this year, I became vegan because I was like, okay, I've decided that I don't want to contribute to this industry anymore. And actually, I didn't consume milk and like plain milk. I'm just a fan of chocolate, and all of the chocolate I used to eat contained milk or milk derivatives. And after that, I was just like, okay, I think it's time to become vegan. And I wanted it to happen like naturally. I didn't want to force myself to become vegetarian or vegan. And I'm happy that it actually happened like consciously. It came to me naturally that I've realized that I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And if I'm like advocating for animals, it's just so wrong to eat animals.
Yeah. So you're just working towards that consistency. And how difficult did you find those changes as you made those steps, both practically, but also socially? Because there can be a lot of stigma around veganism and a lot of cultural identity with meat and dairy and egg consumption.
Yeah, I would say you would probably agree that meat is part of some country's culture. And so Kazakhstan is in that list. Like it's just culture for Kazakhstan eating meat. And
how would you contrast? I mean, it would be interesting to know how it felt for you because you were in the US by that point, but how would that journey have felt differently if you were still in Kazakhstan trying to transition to vegan?
Oh, do you ask what challenges I would face if I were in Kazakhstan?
Yeah. Would it be harder? Would it be more difficult? Again, socially, practically?
Practically, I think it wouldn't be difficult because, as I said, it came naturally. It happened naturally.
Yeah.
So like right now, for example, if I ever smell or see meat, I just immediately imagine a dead animal. So I guess, practically it would be probably the same, maybe a little bit harder because in the United States, you can find a lot of alternatives.
Yeah.
But actually discovered them only recently. But yeah, it's not hard to just eat whole foods like vegetables and fruits. So and I think there are some alternatives in Kazakhstan to meat and dairy products. Socially, my family doesn't really understand me except for my mom. My mom expected that I would become vegetarian and then vegan. Like the older generation, they do not really understand that. They are like panicky. How can I not eat meat? And where do I get my proteins and vitamins? So I was trying to explain them that I can get supplements. And of course, it's not the same, but at least it's my decision and I want to do that. So it's pretty enough.
It's about the nutrients, not the food types. Yeah. And are there many vegan people in Kazakhstan? Is the term well known? Is it becoming part of the culture there, like it is in the US?
No, actually, I haven't seen a lot of vegans. In fact, I've only met one vegan for my entire life in Kazakhstan.
So there's at least two of you.
Yeah.
out of 19 million.
Yeah, it's not really popular because, as I said, people just love eating meat and they don't really care about that.
Yeah. Thank you. One of the other challenges that some people put in front of sentientism, one obviously is, look, you're going too far and thinking about non-human animals and we need to focus more on humans. And you mentioned that dynamic already in a place like Kazakhstan, where there are some very serious issues with human rights and governance and so on that understandably might make it a little bit harder for people to be more generous and think about non-human animals. But both, I think you and I recognize that sentience and suffering matters regardless of species. But some other people criticize sentientism and say it doesn't go far enough. And we should also directly care about plants, biocentrism, or the environment, ecosystems, Gaia, rivers, rocks, mountains, and so on. And what's your openness to even going beyond sentience and saying, look, those things matter directly too?
Well, I think those things that you mentioned, they all matter because like animals, the environment and the planet, they're all interconnected and we're also connected to the whole planet. And I think it's some kind of chain. If we care about animals, then our compassion and recognizing them as sentient beings will actually benefit the environment and the planet in general. Like the most, let's say, important example or issue with fishing, like if we do not stop at least overfishing, it may be just fatal for aquatic animals and also for the planet because the oceans might just get empty and it can impact our planet in terms of the ocean like provides oxygen for us. And if oceans die, like the planet will just die in general. And so, I care about not only animals, but also the environmental impact and the planet.
Yeah, makes sense. And I do too. And I think anyone who even focuses on sentience also has a richly environmental concern because of those interdependencies, right? The reason I care about the planet is not because the planet experiences anything or the planet suffers. It's because we need it, right? All of us sentient beings, right, sort of need it. And the same is true of rocks and rivers and the environment and ecosystems. And there is a frustration sometimes that I'm quite open to thinking that those are extra things, those non-sentient things are also important, as long as you don't forget about the sentient beings. And unfortunately, many people do just that. They'll care about rocks and rivers and ecosystems and species and the environment, but will exclude vast tranches of trillions of sentient beings from any moral consideration. So I don't mind going further if you want, but don't forget the sentient beings at the core. So
yeah, and I should mention that I love space related stuff, but I don't understand why governments spend so much money to explore new planets instead of exploring the oceans, for example, because only roughly 5% of the oceans have been explored, and we don't know what's going on down there. But people are trying to discover new planets instead of caring for the planet we're living in right now. It just doesn't make sense to me. Although I love exploring new places, and I love Mars. I love all those movies and science fiction. But at the same time, I'm why do you throw so much money for something you don't know yet? While there is this planet and you're living on this planet right now, and it hasn't a lot of places haven't been explored yet, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Now I'm torn as well, because I share that sort of sci-fi fascination for space and the universe, and I also quite like thinking about the very long-term future of humans and other sentience if we allow ourselves to have a long-term future. So I can appreciate the intellectual appeal of maybe colonizing other planets or star systems, and where whatever the human species engineers itself to be, where will we be in a billion years? I find that fascinating. But at the same time, I agree, given the problems we're causing right here, right now, it would be nice to focus on fixing this planet rather than trying to escape it.
Yeah.
So there's a tricky balance. And that's quite a nice link to the final topic, really, which is thinking about the future. So I think you and I share a fairly naturalistic view about what's real and ways of exploring uncertainly the universe. And we share that, I guess, a sort of common sense morality that recognizes that sentience matters and the suffering of all beings matters and their interconnectedness matters as well. So it's quite a broad compassion. I'd certainly say broader than the average human, broader than most humans. So if we think about the future, I guess the first question that you can imagine a sort of sci-fi utopian future where the 8 billion people on the planet are much more generously compassionate. They care about all sentient beings, and maybe take a more naturalistic approach too. What could that future look like? But then there's also the more pragmatic question about what can we do today to try and make the world a better place? And obviously your work fits neatly into that second question as well. So yeah, you can either frame a sort of utopian view and tell us what that more compassionate world might look like. We can go straight into thinking about the practical stuff.
I was thinking about that, and it's quite we have to be realistic, of course, and of course, I would like to see the world where everyone is compassionate towards every living being, including us and animals and everybody. Yeah. But to be honest with you, to be realistic, it's very challenging, and maybe it's even impossible, at least in the near future. Maybe people will get to that point eventually, and I really believe they will, because that's why all of us are doing this work, advocating for animals and for the environment and for the planet, to let as many as people know why it is important, actually, and why it is important to take necessary steps right now so we can save this planet. But I think actually raising awareness and educating people, these are two important points where any new field should start with. Because, as I said, for example, for Kazakhstan and for a lot of Asian countries, animal law is not really important. And I can understand why, because there are some countries where there are a lot worse issues. If you take Myanmar, for example, there was a genocide recently, last year, I think. And of course, they do not think about animals right now. They have a lot worse issues.
Yeah. Survival concerns themselves,
Yeah. And for other countries, where the situation is pretty normal, some countries may have animal welfare acts, but they're just not enforced because of bribes and corruption, or because the public just doesn't care or the government doesn't care. So I think what we need to do is to involve the public and to educate it and to provide as much information as possible to let them know that animals matter and every living being matters, and why we should do that, and actually why it is important.
Yeah. And from these conversations, this is a massive oversimplification, but it seems that there's one theme, which is let's just make it easier for people to make less harmful decisions, provide alternatives for them, whether it's products or ways of living. And then the other one is, as you've said, more about education and helping people understand and recognizing certain things matter and helping people take the journey you did of getting more consistent and reducing the cognitive dissonance and thinking things through and just making better decisions. And it's really interesting because, as you say, we can't generalize across Asia because it's a radically diverse range of cultures and countries. But what sort of reception do you get across Asia from that sort of educational initiative? Do you find people resist it, reject it, or find it attractive? Does it have resonance with certain cultural themes across different parts of Asia that others might not expect?
I think it's all of the above because, as you mentioned, it's very diverse, and some people just are not interested. Some people have some interest. Some people just don't care. Some people are resistant. But right now we're building our community among Asian countries so we can actually expand our roots and build some animal law satellites in some countries. And we're partnering with some countries from Asia. And through them, it would be easier to actually build this animal law field and spread the word.
And I'd be interested in your thoughts about how law as a field can play a role in driving change, because my naive view was, before I interviewed some other people in the field, almost that, culture shifted, politics shifted, and then law would follow behind and codify what people had decided was the right way forward. And some of the people I've interviewed have presented a radically different approach where law can actually play quite an innovative role and quite a leading role in making change happen. So I'm interested in your view about what role can the law play, again, particularly across the variety of Asian countries.
I can't speak for all Asian countries because I'm not familiar with so many cultures, and recently just got acknowledged with some cultures like East Asia. I wish it was this way, that people ask the government to adopt some act or some regulations with regard to animals, and the government just follows the public. Actually, it doesn't happen this way in Asian countries. I guess I can speak for myself. I'm from Central Asia, and it doesn't work like that at all. I think the problem, why you're asking why it is important. I personally think the law related to animal is important because that would probably not prevent, but at least reduce crimes against animals, but not necessarily, because there are some countries in Asia where Animal Welfare Act takes place, but it's just not enforced. It's not working at all because of, again, corruption. For example, in Kazakhstan, we don't have the Animal Welfare Act. We don't have any separate law dedicated to animals. There's just one article under the criminal code of Kazakhstan. It's cruelty against animals. And the language is really good. If you read the article, you would be like, wow, that's pretty cool. And it's like a criminal offense. But the act should be done in the presence of minors or with sadistic methods. And even if it's done, it's not prosecuted at all. The police will not even take the case.
Yeah, so the enforcement isn't there, and it renders the law less relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, the problem is in the government, in law enforcement bodies. They're not able to prosecute even the most common crimes that are committed. As, I don't know, maybe it's just my view, and I'm strict and very critical person, but in my opinion, I think they can be those crimes can be prosecuted better, and that's why they're not ready for the animal protection area yet.
Makes sense. And I guess one of the other things that will vary by country is the approach you take to the law, because one approach might be to start from animal cruelty type prohibitions and then see if you can broaden that out. Another one might be to start with protections for certain classes of animals that humans identify with better, and thinking about concepts of personhood, for example, and saying, look, the higher apes and certain other types of animals warrant personhood, and then broadening out from there. And another approach is to go for a much broader approach, which looks at the legal frameworks that actually govern animal farming and fishing as a whole. Do you have a view as to whether any of those or a mix is the most productive route forward? Or again, is it very much dependent on which country you're working in?
It's funny, like I was thinking about that recently, and I was thinking that if you're working to end animal cruelty, you should target like all animals and all categories of animals. You cannot just focus on like cruelty to pets, for example. But then I thought maybe I'm just wrong, because it really depends on the country. And I've lived like in the United States for approximately 2 years, and maybe I just forgot what culture is like in Kazakhstan, in my home country, and like what the perception would be. Maybe I just forgot, because I had some kind of argument with one person in Kazakhstan, and that became really aggressive conversation, because I was like, how can you give a favor to one category of animals and just forget about other categories of animals? Because all animals suffer. If you take any category of animals, I can give you like a lot of examples why aquatic animals or farmed animals or pets or wild animals suffer. But then I got a little bit confused, because I think if the animal law field is a new field for a certain country, you probably need to start with certain categories of animals. For example, if the animal law field is non-existent, you probably need to start with cruelty against pets or stray dogs regulations or something like that, because it's really hard to build something new in the country where the public is very resistant, including the government. So
sometimes you need the wedge to the conversation and work from there. Makes sense. And it is interesting, because while there's been some really interesting work done in the States around personhood and even bringing cases on behalf of specific individual animals, there's been some similarly impressive work in India as well. And on the one hand, you look at that and you think that's so narrow, that's just a very small group of animals, a tiny number. When you look at the scale of animal farming and fishing, why are you bothering? But actually you can see the ripples of influence flowing out from those decisions, because as people recognize in a particularly obvious case, this chimp or this elephant clearly warrants moral consideration, I think it does start to culturally chip away at these boundaries, and people start to go, well, why not horses? Why not pigs? Why not chickens? Why not? So I think there can be a lot of that. I'm an amateur in this space, but it feels like there can be value from those quite narrow approaches, because it gives you a way into helping people recognize the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I think those cases that have been done with chimpanzees, they're probably picking those animals because it might be a good starting point, especially in terms of interactions with judges and proving, because they're much closer to us. But still, they're experiencing like resistance from judges, and they just do not accept cases. And even in the United States, like where I think animal law is very progressive, they're still experiencing some difficulties with legal personhood. But I think that's very nice that they're doing this work, and like with granting legal rights to chimpanzees and horses and elephants.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting way, and it's a good complement. I think there are other approaches we can use at the same time, but I think it's complementary.
Yeah.
And as you said, I think the law can play a progressive role in the story as well. It doesn't just have to react. And while many judges and courts resist those changes, sometimes actually the judges and the courts can drive the change themselves as well, and actually point out the inconsistencies in the law. If you, in one place, you recognize animal sentience matters morally, then as a high court judge, how can you look at that and not start to see the inconsistency? So again, there's some laws that we're hoping that will come through in the UK at the moment, which are recognizing animal sentience. And of course, it excludes farming, fishing, and anything else humans want to do from implications. But it feels like it is an important stepping stone where at least you're almost codifying the cognitive dissonance into law, which hopefully will make it even more obvious and a little bit easier to break. But we'll see.
Yeah. I actually just recently read the article about the UK recognizing animals as sentient beings, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I think that's a very important step.
Yeah, it's very much a conceptual step rather than a practical one. But yeah, I think it's a step. I think it's still a step.
Yeah.
Having said all of that, how does that leave you feeling about the future? Do you feel more optimistic? Do you feel pessimistic? How quickly do you think we can make positive changes happen, both for non-human animals and for us human animals?
I'm actually positive about our future because, like, I experienced myself the rapid change in my view to the world, towards animals and all living beings, and it just happened for months, just several months. And so I believe that education is really important, and because we are sharing our knowledge and information with other people, and if they do not accept this information, it still can plant some seeds in other people.
Yeah.
So I'm actually optimistic about our future, and I believe that soon a lot more people will become compassionate and caring towards living beings.
Yeah, I agree. I hope so too. And if we can keep pushing the education and make it easier for people to do the right thing, then I think we'll be surprised at how quickly change can happen.
Yeah.
That's a good positive note to end on. What's the best way of people following you, working, learning about your work, staying in touch with the Institute of Animal Law Asia? I can include links in the show notes, so don't worry too much, but where would you point people to follow you and your work?
Yeah, you can go to our website. It's ilasia.org, and also find us on social media by searching Animal Law Asia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
That's brilliant. Thank you. My listeners and watchers will go and click and follow you and keep up to date with your important work. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much, Lou. I will let you get on with the rest of your day, but thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Take care.